when President Xi and President Trump met one another, both used different words. President Trump, Professor Ross, said a friendship is being developed between him and President Xi of China. What do you think a friendship means? From his perspective, of course.
Well, I think this is a case of the president. Yes, I think this is a case of the president trying to redirect American policy and redirect expectations of what he can accomplish with the Chinese leadership with President Xi. Of course, the Chinese have an old saying, the first time you meet someone, they're a new friend. Second time, they're an old friend. This is still a new friendship. So we have very limited expectations of just how far this can go. Friendship won't resolve the underlying problems in the relationship. They may be less than President Trump said they were during the campaign, but those problems are still very real and difficult to resolve.
I see. Mr. Teng, what about from the Chinese side? The Chinese president said in his interaction with the US President Trump, cooperation is the key word.
Of course, I think as we have witnessed in recent years, the cooperation has been core interest for the two countries, and actually this is not a new expression by our president. We would like to have cooperation with every country, especially with the United States, in our diplomacy. Actually, I think the number one job is to maintain the stable and good relations with the United States. This is a very important job for our diplomats and for our politicians in the country.
I guess every Chinese also understand the importance of it. Probably also many Americans as well. During the summit with President Trump, the Chinese President Xi Jinping said he is ready to work with his U.S. counterpart to improve relations and find a way to manage differences. There are 1,000 reasons, he said, to make the China-U.S. relationship work, and no reason at all to break it, said President Xi from China, noting that bilateral relations have improved by leaps and bounds since China and the United States established diplomatic relations 45 years ago. It takes political resolve and historical commitment, he said, from leaders of both countries to enhance bilateral relations for the next 45 years to come. That's quite a statement, isn't it? It seems that President Xi Jinping is trying to indicate this is a historical moment that we should take a real historical look at the future direction, bilateral relations. Mr. Dunham.
Well, he's definitely trying to frame the relationship for 45 years, thousands of reasons. I mean, really, it's not so much thousands of reasons as billions of reasons. That's the trade between the two countries. That's the economic benefit for China of trade with the United States, of the United States to the United States of trade and direct foreign investment from China in the United States. President Xi Jinping is trying to frame the relationship as one where what brings the two nations together are more important than the disagreements.
Right. It seems interesting, Professor Ross. President Xi has framed the relationship in a much forward-looking way compared to, let's just say, the American way of asking specific questions. Of course, different issues might be exchanged when it comes to views on the real meeting today, later, just hours from now. But Professor Ross, do you think that kind of a political and historical significance could, in a way, awaken certain senses of President Trump in phrasing this relationship with China?
Well, I think it's certainly true, as President Xi mentioned, that the bilateral relationship has developed to our mutual advantage over the years since normalization. But as China has risen and as the U.S.-China relationship has become more complex, the issues in the relationship are really not bilateral anymore. They're regional. So, of course, we all know that we have differences over the Korean Peninsula. We have differences in the South China Sea, and we have differences over U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. And so what President Xi is saying is, let's focus on the accomplishments of the bilateral relationship and not allow these regional issues to get in the way. That's going to be very difficult. After all, the regional issues are security issues that matter very much to both countries, whereas the bilateral issues tend to be trade and people-to-people relations, and often they can become hostage to regional security problems.
Let's go to Mr. Teng here in Beijing. What do you view, how do you view the insights of Professor Ross on this?
Yeah, I think this is a new age for all the countries in the world. For example, the multipolarization of international politics and the globalization of world economy and the informationization of our society. I think this is a very complete, different world we are living in. And we should have new ideas. In terms of the bilateral relation, I mean, Sino-US relation, at least the 2 points I'd like to mention here. The first is the balance of power between the two countries has been changed or is being changed. And China, after nearly 40 years fast development, China has become one of the most powerful countries in the world.
Yeah, but would that be becoming a positive reason why the United States wants to deal with China in a positive way?
This is the reality, but the United States and China, to sometime, both would not like to accept such a reality. The balance of power between the two countries has been changed.
Right.
Another point I'd like to mention is that the competition in economy, in security, has been intensified in recent years. For example, the dispute in the South China Sea actually is a result of the competition in security, and also the trade, between the two countries, another issue. So I think the meeting this time between the two top leaders in the United States will give some, significant impact on the future of the cooperation or friendship you mentioned just now.
It is the American side that is using the word friendship, interestingly. Mr. Dunham, there are a lot of talks about bilateral, but that was originally coming from the U.S. new administration. Trade to be bilateral, political relationship to be bilateral. Let's just put aside those regional and international frameworks. But in terms of dealing with China, will the Trump administration stick to that line or try to bring in other complicated elements in this bilateral relationship?
Well, I think that President Trump likes to deal bilaterally. His book, The Art of the Deal. He likes one-on-one. He's more comfortable that way than multilateral trade deals and multilateral security issues. The problem is the world is more than two countries, even if they're the largest economies. If you're dealing with Korea, it's more than one-on-one. The United States and China alone can't do it. If there's a one-on-one relationship, it has to be the President of the United States with the leader of North Korea to try to move that along. But I think for Donald Trump, this whole idea of trust, when he talks about friendship, I think what he's trying to say is that he has to trust another leader.
Right.
And considering the rhetoric of the campaign, it's important for China to try to shift his mindset from the attacks on China in the campaign to one where there could be some benefit for the United States of cooperation rather than the confrontation.
We have seen, Professor Ross, some interesting comments coming from both sides. The Chinese President Xi Jinping was talking about 4 platforms on which the bilateral relations have been developing: a political platform, diplomatic, the one about law enforcement, cybersecurity, as well as people-to-people, and also cultural exchanges. Will these 4 platforms be the diamonds also for the Trump administration in bilateral relations? Do you think that could happen?
Well, these 4 elements are certainly sources of common interest between the two countries that enable cooperation to go into the future. But cooperation on these issues can't displace differences over other issues. Now, we all know that North Korea's development and in process of researching an intercontinental ballistic missile is high on the agenda of the United States. And the United States would like China to do more to dissuade North Korea from developing that capability. It's difficult to imagine that these 4 pillars can moderate conflict over such a high security interest in the United States. And of course, Chinese perspectives are similar with regard to U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, particularly given the new leadership on Taiwan and the implications for the One China principle. So for both China and the United States, these issues are going to remain paramount, remain important, and they will not be resolved simply because of the cooperation on the 4 pillars.
Mr. Tong, what do you think?
Yeah, actually, these 4 pillars or mechanisms are very important for the two countries. Actually, China and the United States at least have more than 90 mechanisms in exchanges in various areas. But I think these 4 are at ministerial level just gave the new understanding toward each other and also gave way to have more cooperation. I think the main topic or arrangement in this summit is to just identify the common interest and also the to avoid any clash and to have more and more cooperation in the future.
That's what the Chinese side, of course, wants, and also possibly many in the U.S. side want. But, you know, Mr. Trump, during his little interaction in front of the press with the Chinese president, he also said another thing that I haven't got anything from the Chinese side yet.
Yeah.
he said it twice in different ways.
Yeah.
So one is suspecting whether he's trying to get something from the Chinese side for the meetings to come later today.
Yeah.
So, you know, President Trump has his own style of saying things. So putting that aside, the rhetorical aside, what do you think the two countries can really work on, and that can be done, consensus can be reached for this 24-hour Wings World trip from the Chinese leaders in the United States?
I think several levels we can discuss here. First is the political consensus, because this meeting, of course, even before the conference of this summit, I think the president of the United Donald Trump just said he has got nothing. So at that moment, he said another word.
Everybody laughed at the time when he said that. Of course.
I think the meeting is the personal meeting. It just gave a very important platform for the two top leaders to have a good understanding and to have exchanges of ideas on various issues. So political consensus this time should be made by the two top leaders. And the second is to have some, study or review on the trade and economic cooperation. Just to give a clear-cut explanation who is the winner of the trade cooperation, who has got more from the trade between China and the United States. This is actually, Donald Trump, I think he was misled by the newspapers. Something said China is a stealer of the intellectual products and the.
So you're saying
a lot of job.
So Mr. Teng, you're trying to say.
Yeah. So I think this is another job for the two leaders to just to think about the trade relations, and the third just to explore the new way for the new areas, the infrastructure construction, and also high-tech exchanges. Yeah.
Okay. $1 trillion is that's what is needed for building U.S. infrastructure. Where it comes from, do not know. Whether that would be specifically discussed, of course, it's too much for a first meeting, I guess, to explore all of these areas. But Mr. Ross, before I go to you, Professor Ross, what do you think about the latest interactions, particularly given what is happening recently in Washington? What's happening in Washington over the past few days? Mr. Steve Bannon has been moved outside the National Security Council. Mr. Kushner certainly has playing bigger role in the international policy of this administration. You have possibly the confirmation of Mr. Gorsuch, who is going to be the judge of the specific, the most important legal position, let's just put it in the Constitutional Court. And then you also have this strike in Syria. Enormous amount of things happen within just the last 24 hours. And of course, there's the President Xi Jinping's visit. One would ask the question, how would all of these pieces put together, and how much will the rest of the pieces having its impact, or the other way around, if I understand what I'm trying to ask, Professor Ross?
Well, I think there are two things here. First, regarding the summit, the United States has stressed the importance of this as an introduction for the two leaders. Once again, playing down expectations. A similar approach was taken in meeting with the Mexican president, with meeting with European leaders, moving away from the campaign and lowering expectations. Now, in a similar way, you mentioned the transition in the National Security Council membership and the rising influence of President Trump's son-in-law. We're seeing a transition from the president's campaign team, which did not comprise experts in foreign policy, experts in China. And as the president is learning about the world, perhaps his campaign advisors, who are on the far right, ultra-nationalists, are now being eased aside as the president learns the cost of impulsive behavior in international relations. Now, he needs victories. He needs a victory with the Supreme Court nomination. He needs success with his headlines with China. He needs success with his headlines with Syria. These are all important in trying to get the president off on a new foot after so many failures with Congress, particularly regarding health care. Having said that, what's going to dog this administration going forward, as investigations will continue by both the Senate and the House and the FBI into the campaign's relationship with Russia prior to the inauguration. This is not going to go away. It will be drip, drip, drip with headlines. And so the president's ability to reframe his presidency will constantly be interrupted by these investigations.
And now, what is likely or not rephrase his presidency is he has accepted an invitation coming from China to visit China later in the year. It is quite a frequency, I would say, between the two presidents' exchanges. Mr. Dunham, of course, when you visit a country, you show your attitude in a way, in a warm manner, and you try to seek a cooperation, try to seek common ground. So likely to be President Trump if he accepts an invitation. So, Mr. Dunham, does that news leaking out so far about the bilateral meeting can give us any plan, possibility about what the two countries can work together?
I think it says that they've developed enough of a level of trust that they can have a full-blown summit. I mean, this is not an official state visit. This is a visit at Donald Trump's resort in Florida. This is a get-to-know-you meeting. Donald Trump is about deliverables. He likes to go into meetings and then come out and say, I just saved 700 American jobs. And he's not coming out of this summit with that. But I think when he comes to China, he will expect some sort of agreement, maybe business investment, maybe many of the things that have been talked about for the past 5 years. Maybe we will finally see something move to fruition. And I think what Professor Ross was talking about with the internal battles in Washington over his policy is important. It's important to see who is in the lead. If Gary Cohn, who is his economic advisor, triumphs over the economic nationalists who want to have a trade war with China. And we'll see that in coming months before the meetings in Beijing.
Mr. Trump loves gifts. Mr. Trump loves compromises. But the question is, Mr. Tang, before I go to our American professor, how much China can offer? And what China can get, I mean, if we talk about cooperation.
Yeah, actually, we had discussion, I think, before this studio interview before. I think we talked about the style of Donald Trump. He is actually a dealer. He's a businessman. He has taken the United States as a company. He has already taken the relations
but my question is legitimate as well. I mean, China has to also be the winner in the relationship. Nobody wants to be a loser in the relationship.
This is actually a win-win cooperation, we used to say. I think this time, of course, the win-win cooperation should be the main job for the two top leaders to have new areas to cooperate. For example, as mentioned, just the high-tech infrastructure construction. The cooperation can be a win-win cooperation for the two sides.
I see the light in your eyes when you're talking about win-win, Mr. Tang. I have to say that. So we hope the two presidents will also see that as well. Professor Ross, for you, what about that question? Win-win.
Well, we all know that, yes, we all know that Donald Trump has a list of things he wants from China and he wants to deal, whether it's jobs, whether it's currency, whether it's North Korea, whether it's the South China Sea. Well, when he frames the relationship that way, that we need to deal, I would expect Xi Jinping came to the United States with his own list of things he wanted. He's concerned about American arms sales to Taiwan. He's concerned about restrictions on American technology exports to China. He's concerned about restrictions on Chinese investment in the United States. All these things are on his list. And so a trade, a deal, will require not just win-win, but require American compromise as well. And it's not clear that this is how President Trump is approaching this relationship. In some respects, he seems to think the leverage is on the American side because the market's so important to China, or the leverage is on the American side because the United States is the most powerful country in the world. As suggested earlier, we are in a new era in U.S.-China relations. The balance of power is shifting. The Chinese economy is growing. And so for there to be a deal, there needs to be mutual concessions. It's not clear where the Americans are prepared to give to the Chinese.
All right. We only have about 1.5 minutes to go before we wrap up this discussion. In just about 1 hour's time, the two presidents likely to meet once again for lunch. Before that, they probably also have some interactions if that's the original plan. So what can we expect, gentlemen, in 1 hour? What can be really out of that lunch meeting? Mr. Dunham, briefly.
Korea. I think what we should look at is how the two of them plan to proceed. And if they have a statement that is very positive, it may mean that they're moving forward together.
We'll see. Professor Ross, briefly.
I'm skeptical in Korea. One of the things the Chinese leadership will bring on their list is an American compromise on the THAAD missile system in South Korea, something the Chinese have objected to and have formed their policy toward cooperation in North Korea. I would expect, first of all, simply to say this has been a wonderful meeting and the two have gotten to know each other and now they're friends and they look forward to a follow-up to accomplish more. At this point, it's hard to predict just whether there'll be any successes and where they might be. Perhaps there will be commitments to Chinese investment in the United States, and Donald Trump can rave about how he's bringing more jobs.
All right. Mr. Teng, you only got 30 seconds left.
Yeah, I think the most important thing for this meeting between the two presidents is to establish a good relation between the two men, supermen. And I'm quite optimistic about the future of Sino-US relation. Even we are facing various, obstacles for the South China dispute, cyberspace dispute. But I think the two leaders are tough, are clever, and they can cooperate in dealing with the challenges in Sino-US relations.